Welcome to Lexington Public Library's Tales from the Kentucky Room podcast, where we explore Lexington's history and people. I'm your host, David Bryant, and in each episode, we will feature a guest who will share a piece of local history. Thank you for listening, and I hope you enjoy. Welcome back to the Tales from the Kentucky Room podcast. I'm your host, David Bryant, and today I'm really excited to be speaking with Chad Walker and Erica Friis about the warehouse block in Lexington, Kentucky. Welcome to the podcast. We're going to explore the popular area of Lexington, take a look back at the area's history, its revitalization, and possibly direction in the future as well. So Chad Walker does many things. I was just chatting with him. He's a lifelong resident of Lexington. He's active in many spaces. He's notable as a business developer and into building revitalization. He's currently the chair of the Lexington's Vacant Property Review Commission. And I also learned he's almost a world record holder.
Almost. Just waiting on the paperwork, but
just
real close. Yeah.
Okay, so maybe we'll get a chance to talk about that a little bit as we get into it. Erica is a historic preservationist educator, and she's also the host of the Lexington podcast. It's a really great podcast that focuses on true crime and Lexington history. I thought it might be good to just kind of define for people specifically what is the warehouse block area.
That's all you.
That's it. All right. Well, the warehouse block, we kind of intentionally never really defined it. That way we could, anybody else that's successful and enjoys being part of our little group, then we can, it's not just the buildings we own. So we've extended it sort of over to encompass like Ruth Hunt Candies, and then down as far as like where the Lexington Design Center used to be. We've had conversations about folks like just right across Winchester Road. And then our area is obviously National Avenue, Walton, and North Ashland. So, yeah, we just, anybody that wants to be part of our crazy little crew, then we're obviously welcome at any time.
Okay, great. And so this next question is probably good for Erica. You know, what is the significance historically of this area in the history of Lexington? Can you talk a little bit about?
Sure, I'd love to. I think that the warehouse block has gotten sort of the, for lack of a better term, maybe redheaded stepchild syndrome, which I can say as a redhead, for Lexington's history. I think it's been largely ignored. It was an industrial corridor that was very important in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, and it continues to have that industrial feel. There's certainly some industries that are still there from its original time, but one of my favorite things about the warehouse block is the fact that originally it was, or one of its first industries was brick making. So it was the Lexington Brick Company, which was wildly important for Lexington at that time because originally the Lexington Brick Company was a 6-acre tract on Ashland Avenue, and then they had moved to what the area that we now know as the warehouse block, specifically because that area had excellent clay deposits and soil to create bricks.
Okay.
And so a lot of the structures that we know today, some of the most beautiful structures in Lexington, or most prominent ones, for example, the Lexington Leader newspaper headquarters, the Bible College and Women's Dormitory at State College, the Hagerman Campbell College, which is next to the January House on 2nd Street, Lexington Brewery, and Eastern Kentucky Lunatic Asylum expansions, all those bricks came from the warehouse block.
Wow.
And what's really neat about it, too, is that if you know anyone in Kennewick, of course, that's the neighborhood that's adjacent to the warehouse block, those residents will find bricks in their backyard because there's still remnants of how important and how expansive and large that particular operation was. So with the warehouse block, you know, not only with the brick making that was happening there too, but you had all these other industries, things like concrete and woodworking, the rail station that also came there too. The warehouse block literally built Lexington. And so I don't think that it gets enough credit for how important it was. It's not sexy per se, like horses and bourbon and the things that, you know, your typical Lexingtonian likes to connect with, or maybe Kentucky history is given a lot of favor to, but it's certainly an area that actually built so many of the structures and what we know Lexington to be today.
Wow, that's really cool about the bricks.
Yeah.
How is that researched? Like, how is that, you know, like, how do you discover the bricks?
Oh, they were very proud of their bricks back in the day. Okay. It was like, I mean, brick making was very much a part of newspapers. And like, I think that was a really major part of, this is how and in what ways we're building Lexington. And then these people, you know, these men are coming together to create this tract. You know, they're moving it over from Ashland over to the warehouse. Like, it was like very prominent in the
Okay.
news, things that maybe, your typical Lexingtonian in 2025 wouldn't care as much about. But I think back then it was like front page stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah, that's
Yeah.
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so, okay, so that era, you said like 1880s?
Yes.
Is that kind of when it
1880s. They created 8 million bricks annually. It was a 76-acre tract, 60 plus employees, 20 horses. And it was really, what was neat about it is that they were the first to enable year-round brick production. So it was right at the time when they had figured out like, oh, we can make it beyond just like the nicer months. And so they had figured out the technology to be able to do that in the winter. So we're talking, a huge operation, kilns, brickyards, and then of course the C&O Railway comes along a little bit later, and that makes it really nice for import and transport and things like that as well.
And I guess at that point it would have seemed like countryside.
Oh, the warehouse
like,
block was well out of what was considered the city limits, which is wild to think about because I think of the warehouse block as being downtown.
Yes.
I'm like, we're headed downtown, So
Right.
It's so funny that for so long, up until, I don't know, the 20s or 30s, even National Avenue, when National Avenue was actually created, or, it was like dedicated by the city, was in the mid 1930s. And so that was like, okay, you're a part of Lexington now. But prior to that, it was like outside the city limits,
Yeah,
So.
it's wild to think about that.
It is.
Do you know of any other business names that people now might think of that?
I think Chad Walker is really good at talking about certain ones of these. So we've talked a little bit about railroad development. We can come back to that too. But I love Chad's stories about J.T. Perry, the Perry Lumber Company. I think you should definitely tell those because he was quite the character.
Yeah, he was. And this
we'd
is where
love
I get
to hear
like
that.
totally geek out because where you learn history about it is there's a lady that has a Lexington podcast, it's called. And so I'm a fan of her, obviously. And so I reached out and was like, hey, would you like doing stuff for the neighborhood? And then she comes back a few months later with piles of these things that I didn't know about. And it was just wonderful. I was like, this is amazing. And so I'm a fan of your all's podcast too. I get to sit here and answer questions. It's the coolest thing. So J.T. Perry was an absolute character. Some of the oddball things that he did, and this is the one that everybody likes to hear the most, is he wanted to keep an eye on his workers. And this was prior to video cameras and surveillance and things in workplace. So in the 2-story level where White Dress of Lexington is now is the executive offices. Each office had its own restroom. And inside of each restroom was a little porthole. And so Mr. Perry could sit and do his paperwork in the morning and lift up the little porthole and look out and see if all of his people were working. So those are still there. They've since been closed over, but you can still see the little kind of the window. Another thing this was a lot of people did this time, but they paid by cash. They didn't really do the checks. And so at the end of the week, you got paid. And almost every old building down there has some sort of fire room or safe or something. The one that's a full-fledged safe is in Willis Klein's showroom, and the building had been sitting empty for, 20 or 30 years. It was the old J.T. Perry Lumber Company showroom, and it had a big full-size safe in there. And I said when we bought it, it had been sitting dormant for probably 30 years. Our electricians got up in the ceiling and started playing with some of the stuff, and the tear gas still worked. It absolutely 100% flooded everybody out, filled the room with tear gas. So you saw 30 workers come running out, coughing and hacking, and it wasn't the new style of like pepper spray. It was the full-fledged, you have to spray it out and it's going to be lasting for another hour. So,
oh my God, I never heard that.
It was a rough day. Fortunately, I was outside when that happened, so I didn't have to mess with it. But yeah.
Wow.
But J.T. Perry is another really great example of the warehouse block area really building Lexington as we know it, because J.T. Perry, it was founded in 1917, and him and his father and then his son. It was like a father-son operation. And by 1925, they had built 600 plus custom homes in Lexington.
Oh, wow.
So the idea was that you really wanted a Perry-built home because it was going to be very custom. This was sort of like this like New Deal post-era. So, everybody you get a house and you get a house. And so it was a pretty incredible operation. I mean, he had multiple buildings in the warehouse block. There's still a house that Chad owns right on Aurora that's really close to the Willis Klein showroom. That was their model home to show this is what we can do. That's now you can rent it out as an Airbnb, which I think is a really cool option for people that are maybe coming in town and want to stay close to the warehouse block. I mean, it's such a historic spot.
Yeah, its original setup was they would come in and pour a slab, and then they would pop up the 4 walls and put on the roof and could have it, dried in within a week's time. And all the electric was already in the walls and stuff. So they were kind of like it's FRP walls. So it's kind of like what you see in like a cooler now. And yeah, they just stand it up, put a roof on it, and you're in business.
That's so amazing.
They were in business 73 years, only closed in 1990. So I don't think, again, not a lot of people realize how prolific
literally
they were.
built
Yes,
the
again,
neighborhoods.
exactly.
And yeah, I mean, one of the things that's really cool in Lexington is we have maintained a lot of our structures and a lot of the businesses. My understanding is in the warehouse block, a lot of the businesses retain some of the look and the feeling of the original businesses. And one of them that comes to mind is Eppings.
Sure.
Oh, yeah.
Can anyone talk about that? I'm sure some people.
Both of us know Eppings.
Yeah.
Eppings is what I consider quite the crown jewel of the warehouse block. It's been a very wonderful passion project for me for the past year. When I was getting a historic preservation degree from UK, I chose Eppings to be the one to focus my master's thesis on in terms of putting it on the National Register. So I love that building. I love the story of that building. I think that it has such a great legacy, and I think that one of the greatest things about it is that the Walkers have done such a nice job with transforming it from an old bottling factory into what it is today, which is just this like light and airy, but still very much has the feeling of it being having all that historic charm still. So it was a really beautiful use of adaptive reuse, I thought. But anyway, I love Eppings. Eppings was the original Eppings. Herman Eppings had created a bottling factory in Louisville and then quickly expanded to different places in this region, one of those being Lexington. His original spot was on 3rd Street, I believe. And then once he'd seen that this building, which was originally the building that Eppings is in now, it was a furnace and a roofing spot. Cranfill and Perkins was their name. They were only in business a few years and quickly saw that this would be perfect for bottling because it had a lot of area around it for all of these trucks to be able to line up, which would then become National Avenue. And it really took off. It even did really well at the tail end and post-Prohibition, even though they were bottling Falls City beer. But they were able to really capitalize on the fact that there's this new fandangled, delicious drinks called soda. And so one of the ones that Eppings really capitalized on, which is one of my favorite things, is a drink that is very crisp and light and refreshing. 7-Up. So 7-Up. So he kind of cornered the market on 7-Up. And the best part about 7-Up is that back in the day, I think the advertisings were so clever because it was advertised as the perfect mixer for your alcoholic drink, but it was also the cure for a hangover. So you always needed it before and after. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So huge operation. They had, I think, 165-mile distribution radius. And I mean, Eppings was a big deal back in the day. So.
Budweiser was and I've got a photograph that's always cracks me up, but they had Fall City Beer they had Orange Crush, 7-Up, and then on their trucks had Fall City Beer and then Eppings, and then underneath in little letters it said, and Budweiser. That was too fledgling of a company to recognize on there. I was Budweiser. And this other startup company over here. But if you're ever at Eppings and you're on the upper level bar, right before you walk into the kitchen, there's a framed plaque that has a lot of the memorabilia that we found inside the place. Most people don't know about it, but we've got an old bottle cap. We've got a sales receipt that had a 3-digit phone number, just 3 digits, and some other little things in there. But that's a kind of a cool memory of the former Eppings glory.
Yeah, and I think there was a lot of local, I don't know if the word is pride.
But
celebration of Eppings. I was looking,
totally.
I found some, I forgot to bring it with me, but an old Herald Leader article. It was talking about what a beautiful building it was. Definitely. And it was a wonderful facility.
Well, they expanded onto the side of it. They took care of it really well. They really took care of the bottling equipment too. And
the architecture, the brickwork, they went absolutely above and beyond. We still have UK architecture students that'll come down and kind of study the craftsmanship that no longer exists.
Well, it's a beautiful example of early 20th century commercial architecture for this area. It's a very crown jewel in that sense. Yeah.
And it's a walk across the parking lot. When we do paperwork on Wednesdays, the missus and I can walk down and have a Manhattan or old fashioned at Eppings is the best thing in the world, but it's connected.
They do have the $5 old fashioned happy hour.
That's right. I said Manhattan.
Beyond the beautiful architecture, there's some other great things.
The area at some point started to see some decline. When was that era and what brought that on?
I think it was probably the end of the Epping and J.T. Perry. They made lots of money, and with a lot of people that make lots of money, they give it to their kids, and then their kids don't want to make any or don't have to go in. So it's like, well, they just collect rent, and they just let it get dilapidated. My father, the first property he bought was at the corner of North Ashland and National, and he had an electric business, and so he put that in the building at 333 North Ashland, which is where Seasons Catering and Dynamics is now. And the story I always tell is buildings on either side were run down pieces of junk. So we bought those, spent a long time fixing them up. Well, then properties on the other side of those properties were run down. And so it was just a kind of a slow metamorphosis of the neighborhood. It's wonderful now that people get to come down and experience it and have a drink. But I still feel the memories of like, man, I used to clean that parking lot every day. Or man, I had, these things that happened that I see these echoes of the old fashions help with that.
Yeah. And what were the steps and the conditions that led to its modern development and rebirth?
Jim Gray.
I
give him all the credit because Jim Gray and there was a fellow in planning named Jimmy Emmons, and they came up with the adaptive reuse overlay, which is essentially either a B4, an I1, or an I2 zone that meets other criteria, like the property has to be, 50 years old. You have to have, like install art or do some creative ideas for non-vehicular access. If you jump through some of these hoops, then you can start doing retail. And that's kind of like there was us and Distillery District were the first two that got in that program. And I think it was very forward thinking on the part of Mr. Gray to see that, some of these neighborhoods were sort of heading that direction anyway. And so instead of saying, okay, this is the firewall, you have to stop, well, let's embrace it. And it put a lot of the responsibility back on the landowners of saying, okay, we're going to give you a 50% parking reduction. Now, if we get phone calls because you didn't put enough parking, it's on you. And so these little things that put sort of the responsibility back on the property owner helped head that direction.
So it's a little bit different way of looking at like the businesses.
Yeah. And it takes a unique business that wants to do that. I mean, there's a lot of businesses that, their corporate model is they're going to have 100 parking spaces. So we can't accommodate a lot of those, and we honestly don't want to accommodate the chains, but it does give a place for small business Lexingtonians to come in and thrive.
Can I say something about parking?
Absolutely.
Okay, because I'm very passionate about parking in Lexington in general. I just think that the warehouse block does a really nice job of that because there's little pockets of it everywhere, and it's not difficult to find. And so I don't know if that just came about organically or because the warehouses lent themselves very nicely to having like little small parking spots around it anyway. And then of course you got the neighborhood right behind there too. That's always nice to kind of be able to use as well. But it's not like giant parking lot and then you have to walk 2 or 3 blocks over to this whatever district.
Right,
like, it feels organic. It feels natural. Yeah.
Yeah. And we don't tow either. That's one of our things. If there's any vehicle that gets towed, I'm the guy who did it. I still have to go and do those things. But for the most part, we want people to park at Epping's and have a bite to dinner and then walk down to Mere Twins and have a drink and then walk over to Sav's and have ice cream or whatever. So there's no threat ever of, well, can we park here? Well, yeah, you can park anywhere in the neighborhood as long as it doesn't, have a sign. I mean, it's somebody else's property. Like there's 2 blocks of free for all, have a good time.
Yeah, and I think that kind of contributes. It really is almost like a neighborhood kind of feel to it. I mean, as opposed to, just like a shopping development that has sprung up. I mean, it has very much a sense of like almost like community to it.
Yeah. For sure. Well, you also have, I think the warehouse block really gets compared to the Distillery District pretty often. They were both kind of up and coming almost at the same time, and they have some similarities. But I think what the warehouse block really, not that I don't love the Distillery District, but the warehouse block really stands out because Kennewick shows up for the warehouse. I mean, like it is always this neighborhood feeling and this neighborhood, it's a symbiotic kind of relationship between the two. And they both take pride in each other. And it's special to see. I really appreciate that about it. It makes me think about moving to Kennewick, but I could never afford it at this point because everybody's in Kennewick.
Right. What do you see its direction for the future? Do you see any future plans or?
No. I mean, the future plan is we've got to get that parking lot finished. We're doing the thing with Lexington's Farmers Market where they've got the slab there and they set up every Tuesday and Thursday. And this is a little aside as a ghost story, but If you've ever driven up National Avenue in the winter, right after it snowed, you'll see ghost railroad tracks in the middle of the road. And the reason is because we own properties on both sides. We've taken up the tracks, but for some reason, they were just paved over year after year when Corman and CSX orchestrated it. So the railroad ties or the railroad spike are still just under the surface. So every time it snows, because of the depth, you just see these weird little ghost tracks right across the middle of the road. So yeah, aside for a ghost story.
But that's a good story.
Once the lot is done, and we're going to do about 50% of the lot is going to be green space. So we can have events, we have open yard area, maybe a little dog park.
Pavilion.
A big pavilion, like have some music and things. And we've got the EDC, so any neighborhood shop or restaurant that sells alcoholic drinks by the glass, you can wander around the neighborhood. So that'll be a nice spot where you can have go and have a picnic, have a bite at Blue Door, and then go get a drink at Mirror Twin, and then go sit out on the lawn. Once that's done, I'm going to take a break. I think that's plenty of time coming. I'm going to relax for a couple years.
You can find a new region of the city to revitalize.
Start from scratch, Chad.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing, too. I keep working with like idea people like Erica that will come in and I'm like, all right, I'm going to take a break. Like, well, have you thought of this before? I'm like, man, that sounds great. Yeah, let's do that. Let's go that direction. So,
Well, we recently also brought back the block parties. So that's twice a year, which is a really great time to showcase not only the area, but also vendors, local vendors in the area too. And our first one back since COVID was this past May. The next one will be Saturday, September 20th of this year of 2025. So music, local fun stuff.
Yeah.
Right down National Avenue.
Yeah.
It's always fun.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, I think you've both done a great job at painting a picture and talking about the history. Was there anything else that you wanted to cover that I didn't ask you about? Or
Well, when you were mentioning the railroad, like the ghost stories, it reminded me, we also have Erin Goins, who does such a great job with Bites of the Bluegrass. And so she has a fabulous, if anybody else is interested in really experiencing warehouse block history as you're walking and living it, she does a fabulous job with the tour of, and it's a cocktail tour, so it's even better. But she had mentioned I went on the tour recently, and she had mentioned too that there were bodies that were buried from the cholera epidemic. So we knew that, Solomon had taken a lot, all the stories about them going over more, north and I guess maybe more east of town or west of town. But this was a spot too where she had found information that they had been.
Wow.
Also, I mean, it did wipe out like a fourth of the city.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So they had to go somewhere, and I guess some of them are on national, under national.
Well, that's another topic.
So I always want to bring it back to the dead bodies.
Yeah.
So you get for getting a true crime person.
That's right. That's right. I can't help myself.
Speaking of which, did you want to give a plug for your other podcast?
Yeah, no, I would love for people to be able to listen. If you're interested in Inside the Block, is what we're calling the official Warehouse Block podcast.
Okay.
So each and every episode, we go around and interview a different warehouse block business or person that might live in the area. And it's been great so far. It's under a year old, but we have some really great episodes out there. A lot of fun stuff looking into like how they smoke meats at Blue Door and how they make the beer at Mirror Twin and what the Salt Cave is like. I mean, It's just such a great area it's incredibly diverse. And one other thing that I really love about the warehouse block too is that it has used to be so male dominated, all these like industries that were, of course, like concrete and custom homes. And now it's actually the majority is women owned. So it's done this like really cool flip to where it's kind of like these female entrepreneurs
not intentional.
Yeah. And I just think it's great. Yeah.
It is.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Erica. Thanks, Chad.
Thank you for having us. This has been absolutely a treat. Yeah, this is wonderful. I really appreciate it.
Thanks again.
Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to Tales from the Kentucky Room, a podcast brought to you by the Central Library's Kentucky Room staff at the Lexington Public Library. If you enjoyed listening, please take a minute to subscribe, rate, and review the podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever else you get your podcast. And please remember to recommend the podcast to friends. If you have any questions about local history or genealogy research, you can visit us in the Kentucky Room to use our collection and newspaper microfilm. Or you can email us at elibrarian@lexpublib.org. That's elibrarian@lexpublib.org. I'm David Bryant, and we'll be back with another episode next month.